Awakened Living is a 21st century movement for people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious, who have a deep hunger for connected community and a divine impulse for personal and global transformation. Our mission is to encourage and inspire the awakening of human consciousness. Good evening. Welcome to Awakened Living Television. My name is TJ Woodward. I'm the Minister and Spiritual Director of Awakened Living in San Francisco. I am so excited about this evening's show. We have Ashanna Solaris here. I'm not even going to spend any time doing any kind of intro. She and I just feel like lifetimes of connection with her, although we've actually physically just met for the first time. And I just want to get right into the conversation. But in general, one thing we may be talking about is integrating all parts of ourselves in our spiritual path. And what has been really up for me, last month at Awakened Living, our conversation was about birthing a greater reality. And a big piece of birthing this greater reality is taking all parts of ourselves, integrating that. We're not doing a spiritual bypass here. It involves working with trauma. It involves working with shadow and light. And I know that Ashanna is a person that is deeply committed to her own spiritual journey. And I feel so incredibly grateful that she's here. So Ashanna, welcome to our show.
Thank you, TJ.
I'm so happy you're here.
I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, and I know that you've recently had quite an expansive experience that I would love to hear about. But before we get in the conversation, why don't you take a few minutes, if you will, to tell our viewers just a little bit about you, your work in particular, and maybe anything else you want that feels relevant right now.
Okay, sure.
Okay, yeah.
So I've been on the spiritual healing path for over 24 years. I started at a really young age when I had some pretty radical spiritual awakenings and spontaneously became a healer. And then I did all the training to really be successful at that. So it's been a 24-year journey, which has ended in this point in my life being a teacher, a one-on-one alternative therapist, mostly working with breath work. We call it clarity breath work. We pioneered our own brand of breath work, which addresses really deeply held trauma from the cells of the body and also helps to awaken consciousness to that expanded sense of who we really are and to heal the imagined separation from source. And I also teach people how to be practitioners in that work, and just finished a 6-week journey in Costa Rica where we were teaching and training and leading people through the healing processes of clarity breath work and watching amazing miracles unfold.
Wow. So I want to hear how you language that about the imagined separation from source.
Yes.
That's the thing that stood out to me, among other things. But, you know, I mean, we hear all the time, and most of us on this journey know that we're one with source, and yet.
Right. We have many programs and beliefs and blockages in our bodies and in our cellular memory banks and in our nervous systems that tell us a story of separation and a story of unworthiness and unlovability, aloneness and disconnection. And unless we have the tools and the love and the capacity to meet those places within us of contraction and fear, we don't go all the way through into a true liberation into what we are. We might have a good idea that we are one with everything, but then when we get into a relationship and our partner does something that we don't like
in the real world,
right, or someone doesn't give us something we feel we deserve, or we lose our job, or a life situation happens, it's easy to get sent back into the old belief structure, usually formed very early in life, that we are alone, separate, not supported, perhaps in a hostile world.
And what doesn't work or didn't work for me, and I want to be careful how I language this, because when I came into this teaching, and what I mean by this teaching is that we're one, that I'm one with Source.
Yes.
What I immediately grabbed onto is this idea of affirmations.
Yes.
And affirming my perfect life. And I came into a teaching that was a lot about the mind, a lot about holding thoughts in mind and then it producing a particular result.
Right.
But what happened for me is it worked,
Mm-hmm.
except
Mm-hmm.
I was putting that on top of these old beliefs that had not really fully been addressed.
Yes.
I may have had an intellectual understanding that I had trauma in my life, or an intellectual understanding that there are some old beliefs that I have that are keeping me feeling separate. But I just kind of buried that.
Right.
And I said, no, I'm whole and perfect, and I'm love and light.
Yes.
Created this fabulous job, this great house, this great partner. I had the
Yes.
right car, and I felt more and more empty,
Yes.
more and more separate.
Mm-hmm.
And then the day came when I had the calling to go much deeper, and my whole world fell apart on the outside.
Right. Yes.
So let's talk
Good.
about that. Yes, it was so
And
good.
that was good, right?
That-
Because
it was-
that really began your real spiritual journey.
Thank you.
And up until then, it was the spiritual journey of the mind, thinking
Yes.
it's going to create a perfect reality.
Yes.
And it's not going to create a perfect reality. And
Yeah.
true spirituality is not about getting a better life. True spirituality is really about embracing all of who we are. And in fact, the more light, the more goodness, the more success, the more we also have to face the other side of the shadow and the depth. And we're carrying not only our own family, but an entire lineage
Yes.
and an entire collective unconsciousness that needs to be also brought into awakening or higher consciousness.
Yeah, and I had a great spiritual teacher that said the only real way to speak about spirituality is to speak in paradox. It's this and that.
Yes.
It's light
both.
and dark. And
It's both. And one of my spiritual teachers, Gangaji, who I've received a lot from, says that you think that when you go to a spiritual teacher that you're going to feel, bliss and happiness. And a lot of times when you go sit with a true spiritual teaching or teacher, you're thrown right into the heart of your deepest misery and pain. Because that's actually where you need to go to discover who you are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because I recently had someone say to me that they cannot come to awakened living anymore because they don't want therapy.
Right.
And I hear and saw what they might have meant by that, and I understand that we're not doing therapy. Not really. We're doing something much different. And so that was such a perfect affirmation for knowing that we're holding this
Yeah.
very sacred.
It's important to me to really have both, to have a balance in our nervous systems of what is difficult, what is painful, what is challenging. So they're even finding that in traditional therapy, like talk therapy alone, does not heal our pain or our trauma, that it has to happen through the physiology. So it's good to, we create in our workshops, we create a lot of joyful, blissful, wonderful opening experiences. And then we dive into the other side that's naturally going to come up. Because when you bring in more joy, you bring up more sorrow. And when you go through the sorrow, then more joy enters. And you can't have joy without also having sorrow. You can't have one without the other because they're completely connected.
And really, in so many ways, it's really my mind that decides what's good and bad. My mind is really wanting to push away an experience that I've labeled as bad. So I actually, there are two things that we can take this a couple of different directions. One, I'd like to hear about how that happens in your workshops, your breathwork workshops, because some people may not even know what breathwork is.
Right.
Maybe we'll just start there, and then
Right.
remind me, though, I want to hear
Okay.
about this expansive experience you had last month.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, so let's start with what breathwork is.
Well, breathwork really emerged out of the consciousness movement of the 60s and 70s, and there were many different kinds of breathwork being developed. It's actually thousands of years old. It goes back to Kriya Yoga in India, and we even know that shamans way back in Mongolia were practicing circular breathing techniques. So it's one of the most basic ways we can heal is through breathing. And so in the 70s, many people that were exploring consciousness, the explosion that was happening in personal growth, started to do breath work. So there's many different schools. Our school came out of the school of Leonard Orr and Sandra Ray, who were here in San Francisco, who created rebirthing, which was really based on a lot on healing the trauma of birth. And that is a profound part of our work. Healing pre- and perinatal trauma is essential to having healthy relationships, having a healthy relationship to ourselves, to life itself. It's a profound body of work. But we changed the name in '99 to Clarity Breathwork because it's not just about birth, it's about the present moment, which is connected to everything, including birth, including childhood trauma, including our relational history, and including expansion of consciousness. So in many languages, the word for breath is the same as the word for spirit. So it's a direct connection to our spiritual nature. Sandra Ray used to call it a biological experience of God in every cell of the body.
I love that. In the 1980s, I did rebirthing.
Oh, great.
And it was the most incredible experience up to that point.
Right.
I had not quite yet gone to India and met Amachi and had these other experiences. What breath work, which was called rebirthing then, or what I did was called rebirthing, I actually literally experienced what it was like, how terrified I was. How terrifying it was. And I then went back and asked my mother about my birth, and it was, I wouldn't come out, and I was breech, and there were forceps, and then I was thrown in the incubator, and how that really initial trauma
can really affect you.
Can really affect me.
Yeah. We just did a group in Costa Rica with 31 people from all over the world, sharing about what happened to them at their birth and the insights that can be gained about, if a baby's delivered with forceps, that's a searing pain on the head. And I had a forceps birth, which I've relived many times, is people are out to get me. I can't trust people. Support is painful. So my support people have had to really learn how to navigate around a lot of anger, a lot of self-protection, because that hurts.
Yeah.
And then the cord is often cut way too soon. The baby's hung upside down and spanked to get the breath in the body, and that's often our welcome to the world.
Yeah.
And yet what they say is the most difficult aspect of the way many of us have been born was separation from mother. And taken away and put in an incubator or put in an isolette, which is what those things are in the nursery.
Yeah.
And so that feeling that we have in our Western culture of something's wrong with me, why aren't I loved, I'm separate, I'm not good enough, a lot of that comes either in the womb already or certainly right around the birth experience itself.
Yeah, and then there's a culture that was my experience, and then I passed that on to the next generation, and so on and so on. And so much of this work that we do, I know you and I do, if we call it work, I like to always say that, because really
it's our service, it's our gift.
Yeah, and our knowing that we're here to do this. So much of it is about really coming to terms with, and I want to talk a little bit more about knowing that we're source, knowing that we're source, and then also the other layers that get added on top of that. And I know that you refer to that next layer, and you can speak to this, but vulnerability is like this next layer. So I'd love to hear about how vulnerability plays into it.
Well, the truth is that we are all source, we are all essence, we are all pure love. That's what we are at the core. And yet when we come into this life experience, we often forget. We experience an abandonment from God, perhaps, or an abandonment from mother at the time we're taken away, or from father, and a betrayal of that trust, and we start to begin to develop an egoic sense of self as separate, as victim, as vulnerable, as rejected. And so we call it, at the core, we are essence. And then around that is a layer called vulnerability, which is all of our fear, our shame, our hurt, the abandonment wound, our rejection, our helplessness. But then it's too much to live with that level of vulnerability, so then we need a shell to put around that, which we call protection.
It's like the facade of the ego.
The facade, the ego, or the strategies of avoidance, and there are many strategies of avoidance, our persona, our character, our addictions, in order to try to avoid feeling our vulnerability. Yeah.
And what's great is, well, this is how I'm going to say this, I guess. Knowing that the truth of who we are is none of that doesn't mean that I get to bypass all of that.
That's
and
right.
that, I mean, when I came into the teaching, I thought, well, I'm whole and perfect and I'm God, so that's it. Done.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well,
and there's truth to it. There is a level where there's truth to it, but there's also, as long as we're here in a body, there is work to be done.
Yes.
And it's not helpful to say, I had a boyfriend once that thought he was very enlightened. And so I would get upset because he'd do something that in my mind was completely off, and he'd say, who is angry? Who is upset? And I had a teacher one time say, you should have slapped him and said, who is feeling that slap right now? Because to bypass these things, it's not what we're here for. We're actually here for the totality of the human experience.
And at one point, because we hear a lot about human being having a spiritual experience, spiritual being having a human experience, and at one point, I either heard internally or externally, I don't actually remember, that I'm a spiritual being having a spiritual experience. And that human piece is part of this spiritual experience, that my mind wants to call one good and bad, right and wrong, and that enlightenment must mean that I don't have the human experience. And boy, that's what I was hoping for. That's what I thought a spiritual experience was, and my experience now is so different than that.
I really like that term Samuel Bonder coined, waking down. Because it's really about, and I like to call it embodiment. It's like really coming fully into our bodies, fully into our feet, fully into our ground, fully into our emotional bodies, and finding out what is actually the capacity and potential of this human being when it is fully online, when it's fully awakened and able to be utilized by spirit. Then what's possible in this world?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. That's a question that I live in. What else is possible?
What else is possible? And we see way too many gurus that are talking about spiritual enlightenment and then doing something really corrupt behind the scenes where it's not integrated into the whole self. There's a real divide between the idealism of spiritual awakening and the lived reality of a true embodiment.
Yeah, and that's last month at Awakened Living, our topic was birthing a greater reality. And it was really a lot about integration, a lot about looking at this way that we take all parts of ourselves. And the phrase that comes up for me is integration precedes transformation. Now, I don't know if it's that linear, because my mind wants it to be linear, but it is about integrating all parts of myself in order to feel the full capacity. And at Awakened Living this month, we're talking about awakening joy. And I know that we're so blessed that you're going to be speaking at Awakened Living the last Sunday of April, and we're so grateful for
joy.
that.
Well, I love
joy.
To speak about joy. And again, unless we've really faced our deep sorrow or our deep sadness, we don't get to the joy. So really, we call the big drop is when someone comes out of the protection, the shielding. And that might take time because maybe the trauma was so severe that we're not ready until in our 50s or later. So there's no judgment about how much time it takes, but that big drop from protection to vulnerability to essence. And so there's no one that we've seen that's really faced their deep pain and hasn't come out the other side into an experience of joy, because that is our inherent nature.
Absolutely. And I cannot tell you, well, I don't need to tell you because I know you know, how many people say to me, there's at least one moment in this journey where there's this deep level of sadness that I can't believe I'm 53 or I can't believe I'm 42 and it's taken me this long. And so, yes.
Yes, and thank God they actually got there, because so many people actually get to their deathbed and regret that they never did the work, that they never took a look, and now it's too late.
Yeah. Or not. We may go somewhere else and continue their work. We don't know.
Right, in this incarnation.
In this incarnation, yes.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to this transformative experience you had a few weeks ago.
Yes.
Yeah, so
in
can
Costa
you tell?
Rica.
Yeah, in Costa Rica. I was going to say Peru. I knew that wasn't right.
But
so,
that's the next stop.
Okay.
So I'm just really fascinated in these indigenous cultures in South America because they have so much to teach us. Because we as Westerners have gotten really disconnected from the Earth Mother. So I was just in a community called Pachamama, which means Earth Mother, and we did 2 8-day trainings. One is our level 1 and 2 is really for personal transformation, so it's for people to go deeply into their own journey around birth trauma, around childhood trauma, relationship, sexuality. It's a lot in 8 days. And we use, what is so transformative about it is I get to combine everything that I love, which is dance and movement, to get us in our bodies, to get us moving, because so many of our problems are because we don't move enough anymore. So just to get people moving and expressing and coming into the body, And then my partner does amazing kirtan, which is, say, 5,000-year-old mantras, which is Sanskrit, which is an ancient language that just chanting Sanskrit is supposedly activates centers in the brain that release neurotransmitters that help us to open. Master Babaji said that Om Namah Shivaya is more powerful than the atomic bomb. One Om Namah Shivaya. So here we chant, we pray, we meditate. I bring in a lot of meditative energies to bring people into their bodies and begin clearing out of their chakras. You know, what we've held way more than we imagine condensed in our chakras. So by breathing and intending and sacred music and being surrounded by beauty, nature, birds, butterflies, monkeys, the trees, people just start letting go. And then we do all these processes of, you know, facing what was difficult, what was painful, going back into our birth experience and bringing the love that wasn't there, bringing the consciousness and the awareness that wasn't there. And through the group witnessing individuals, people really, as Rumi said, come into full color. You know, it's like people come in black and white. You can see them in their characters. We had one guy come in very defensive and aggressive and bullying, and by the end of 16 days, he did the professional training too. He said, I really see now how I can be soft and just as powerful. Someone else said, another man said, I haven't cried this much in 35 years. You know, people just, they crack open, they leave the past behind. And yes, what's left is an incredible joy and celebration of life. And not that there won't be more, there will be more. You can guarantee it.
Yes.
It's now we have the tools of the breath, of putting on music and dancing, of the permission to express whatever's there. You know, it could be joy, it could be sorrow, but letting go of the judgment, right? The judgment that sorrow is not spiritual or anger is not spiritual.
Yes, and
only joy and peace and love.
And thank you for that,
Yeah,
because
so
I just know, in the 21st century that we are looking for something very different, certainly than some power outside of ourselves to surrender to, but even more, some way to just go right to bliss and not experience this.
That's right.
We are really integrating this.
That's right.
And I know that you're a big part of that, and that your consciousness, even though we've never met, your particular consciousness has changed so many people I know directly. And thank you for your work.
I'm honored to get to be an instrument. You know, it's my deep pleasure to be an instrument, and a lot of that comes out of my own deep, journey into pain and trauma and facing. And I wanted to say, if I could say, about the healing of really of the world, because instead of also looking outside and seeing the world and thinking that there are so many problems in the world that we need to address, and spiritual seekers often want to escape to bliss and peace and love. And I was recently in a very profound indigenous ceremony where we were praying for the water in the world. And probably most of the people there were 200 people there, were crying as we were praying for the water in the world, the water to come back to the rivers and the watersheds, and the waters to be cleaned in the oceans around Fukushima. And then the shaman said, we must clean our own inner waters.
Yes.
If we want the outer waters to be clean and abundant, we have to clean our inner waters, meaning we have to clean out the toxic residue of maybe some of the abusiveness or pain that was passed on from generations.
And thank you. I'm so grateful the shaman said that, because that's exactly what I thought, that we so often want to try to fix it on the outside, and it's both. Right.
It's an inside job, and we may be called to radical service in the world, but it's an inside job. It's not on the outside.
Yeah, and it starts with the decision.
And that's what happens in these retreats. People clean on the inside, and their whole lives begin to shift because they did the internal work.
Yes. You're not going to believe this, but we're out of time.
Wow.
So I just want to formally invite you to come back on the show for at least one more show, because
I'd love to.
I thought I wanted to bring up forgiveness and talk about forgiveness, so maybe our next show.
They say forgiveness is the master erase in the Course in Miracles.
Yes, so thank you, Ashanna. And
You're
in
welcome.
closing, please take a moment to tell our viewers how to contact you, your website, and all of that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to find out more about my work in individual healing and also retreats and seminars in Costa Rica, Maui, the Big Island, Mount Shasta, Canada, Calgary, Golden, BC, and in Europe, go to my website, ashannasolaris.com or claritybreathwork.com, and you can find out all the information you need, including my recorded guided meditation CDs and breathwork journeys, and also look me up on YouTube under Clarity Breathwork.
Thank you, Ashanna, and thank you everyone for being with us. And I look forward to having Ashanna back again to continue these conversations. And I feel like I have just found a kindred spirit, so I'm just beaming right now with joy. And at Awakened Living this month, we are talking about awakening joy. And I love that wake down. I'm going to be using that. Wake up and wake down. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Ashanna. And everyone, please join us at Awaken Living. We meet every Sunday morning. We also have a Saturday morning and a Monday evening group, awakenedlivingsf.org. And again, in April, we're going to be living in joy, awakening joy, and Ashanna Solaris will be our speaker, our guest speaker, the last Sunday of the month. So please, please, please join us. Many, many blessings, and remember, the truth of who you are is love, is light, is spirit. Thank you, and good night.